Hello and welcome to the Gnostic Warrior radio show and podcast, broadcasting from GnosticWarrior.com in San Diego, California, to around the world. I'm your host, Mo, and today on the show we have author Fritz Zimmerman. Fritz is the author of the Nephilim Chronicles, Fallen Angels in the Ohio Valley, and also a new great book called the Nephilim Chronicles, a travel guide to the ancient ruins in the Ohio Valley. It's great talking to Fritz and finally learning about these Nephilim giants who had lived in the past, and are they still around today? Did they mix their DNA with other humanoids to make us who we are today? Find out those answers in this great podcast. So how you doing today, Fritz? How's the weather treating you where you're at in the world today?
Real good. It's actually a nice day in Indiana. We're at about 32 degrees.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm here in Southern California. It's the weather's kind of up and down, but we got Santa Ana winds, and we're about 80 degrees. So,
oh wow,
interesting weather here today. And what I'd like to do, Fritz, I know there's a lot of people who are familiar with your great work you've been doing over the years with the Nephilim. What I want to do is educate them and people that might not know of you about your background before you got into that great work that you're doing today.
Well, my actual professional background is in television communications, where I got a BA from Purdue University. So, kind of off topic, actually.
Yeah,
and this started out as was going to be a short documentary, but it just got so big and so involved. So, it turned out to be a 6-month project, turned out to be a 13-year project.
What I'm finding, Fritz, is a lot of people are running into the same thing when they start researching a subject such as the Nephilim or ancient history. It starts out as maybe an innocent, I want to write an article or a book, and then it turns out into multiple years and sometimes a lifetime of work. It seems like this is a common thread throughout all the authors and people who are studying this type of thing. Do you agree?
Yeah, and I do. And, the thing is that there just was no precedent. So everything that I was finding as far as the large skeletons, all the field work I did for Volume 2, which is the travel guide, nobody had been to these sites. Nobody had explored this. And so it was all virgin territory. And it was unbelievable. So that was a real plus in, keeping the fire going and, staying motivated for all those years.
It's hard. It must be some type of inner fire or drive that drives many of us to complete this work that is really often low-paying and no money at all in it. It's just basically our inner drive and our spiritual desire to know the truth. Before I get into, a lot of the work that you've done here in the United States and the mounds and a lot of the stuff you found in Ohio, can you explain to the audience who were the Nephilim?
Well, Nephilim actually translates to giants. So we're talking Nephilim, we're talking about the ancient race of giants that almost every culture and civilization has some tale of an ancient giant race. Probably one of the best known, of course, is that in the Bible, Genesis 6:4, when it talks that there were giants in those days, and also after that, talking about pre and after the flood. So, but, it's finding that there is so much evidence and skeletal remains, et cetera, that, in fact, that a giant race did exist, that they were seafarers, they were out looking for metals at the advent of the Bronze Age, which, of course, makes it, associated with Stonehenge and the many henges we have here in the Ohio Valley. So my book was to tie all of that together, to tie the material culture and skeletal remains, numerology, geometry, sacred geometry, symbolism, and to find that there were these common threads within all these giant races in different continents.
So the Nephilim, you had explained, it means giants, basically. Would they be connected with the same beings called the Anunnaki and possibly the Sumerians later that were a later culture?
Yeah, there are some ties with the Sumerians. The Anunnaki, I don't necessarily adhere to, that theory, but, I do leave openings in the book where you could interpret that as when we talk about the book of Enoch and the angels coming down and those sharing these secrets with these new race of giants that was created by their mating with women. Now, you want to interpret that as angels or Anunnaki or aliens, that's really up to the reader to decide.
The Nephilim would be considered the sons of God. Would that be the biblical story of the sons of God came into the daughters of men?
Yes. And then the race from that was the giant race. Now, scientifically, in which I like to base, my theories on, that genetic manipulation actually was the mixing of Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal. And so we find in a lot of cases that the skeletal remains have more archaic skull types than that of modern humans, being protruding brow ridge, slip forehead, massive jaw, occipital buns. And so a lot of the physical characteristics that we would associate with Neanderthal or archaic, we're going to find reproduced within the giant race.
What's interesting to me is that I believe that I'm a descendant of this race. And I've actually had a DNA test where I've tracked my DNA in all these same locations. And to go along with the DNA science and then also my own research into history, I've also found that I have similar birthmarks to some of these beings that are mentioned in ancient history. And then also I have a extremely large head. And when I say large, Fritz, I'm talking I have to, when I play football, I have to get a custom helmet just to fit my head because the largest helmet that they make won't fit my head. And then when I play baseball, I literally got to tape the back, and then I got that brow ridge as well. I've been told that many times. My wife tells me. And then I also have a cleft chin that seems to be common with a lot of, again, I didn't find a direct correlation as far as the Nephilim or the ancient giant race having a cleft chin, but all throughout history you see royalty and all these huge kings and Roman emperors all having this cleft chin, and then I have the blue eyes. Would they have some of these same characteristics I'm mentioning now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and then, so I had a son come out. I'm 5'10", and he came out 6'4", and he's 260 pounds. And he came out a giant, and we call him a gentle giant. So it's really interesting, and it seems like we're driven to this research because it comes from within. And again, I'll get into that later. Are these the Nephilim described in the Book of Enoch?
Yes. And really the Book of Enoch is very important because the sons of God give the giants a list of secrets, and that's really just kind of the litmus of what we're going to find within the giant races, whether it be in the Ohio Valley, England around Stonehenge, or even back into the biblical Levant, and that is the knowledge of metals, which of course was precipitated them coming over here and over to England. Learning the course of the sun, of course, with the henges, those are solar temples. The course of the moon, where we have lots of earthworks in the Ohio Valley that are dedicated towards the tracking of the 18-year cycle of the moon, the stars. And so when we go through the Book of Enoch, that's really given us the list of characteristics that we're going to associate with the giant race.
What's your theory on all these different, stone buildings and giant structures and things that are attributed to the stars or seem to be aligned to them? Would that be for seafaring and for crossing the sea, so they have all these places for navigation, or would you say it's related to the as above the stars in their home?
Well, there's a ceremonial or a religious aspect, and then, of course, they would have had to have had that knowledge to be seagoers. So, one is more of a mechanical or an applied science, and the other is more for the ceremonial purpose of doing that. But when we look at Ohio, things like the Hopewell Road, where you have a perfectly straight road that goes for 60 miles, obviously they would have had navigation skills to lay out a road that long and have kept it straight. So we do find evidence that they did have navigation skills even in the Ohio Valley.
That's interesting. And do you see relations to the later cultures, such as, the Greeks, the sea peoples who the Egyptians mention in their hieroglyphs, and then also they're mentioned in the Bible as the Philistines? And then later we have the Phoenicians, who aren't really mentioned too much in the Bible, but they seem to be a specific race that colonized the world via the sea. And then we have the Vikings, who are, of course, a great seagoing warrior. Did you find any connections between these later races and people with the Nephilim?
Not so much. Phoenicians, that is just kind of a long, drawn-out peoples, but really when you're saying Phoenicians, you're talking about Canaanites, and it's very early on, so we don't want to go anything past about 1500 BC over in the biblical Levant. We're not going to talk about anything past 1500 BC over in the British Isles. So the subsequent people that came over there, didn't really have anything genetically tied in with the original Nephilim giant race.
Who would the Nephilim be? You had mentioned the Cro-Magnon and then also the Neanderthal. What would they be? Would they be the Cro-Magnon or the Neanderthal?
Well, the tribe that we best know in the Bible is the Amorites. Okay. And the Amorites were accounted giants. We know the Amorites were in Babylon in 1950 BC. We know the Amorites developed high mathematics or advanced mathematics, the pi, square root, all that emanated from them. We know the earthworks in Ohio Valley were constructed with that knowledge of high mathematics, of pi and square roots were incorporated into the lengths and measures and angles of those earthworks. So the Amorites are our best tie. We can also associate the Amorites with conical mounds with circles that go around them. We find those over in the biblical Levant, and of course we find them as the prototype of almost all the mounds in the English countryside, and that being one of the most prominent mound types also in the Ohio Valley. Interesting enough, almost if you find a mound with a circle around it, it's probably going to contain a large skeleton. The mound types themselves, we can track those across. Of course, the henge, we're associated with Stonehenge, the stones. The henge is a circular earthwork that goes around that. It's a circular earthwork with an outer wall, interior ditch, and a gateway aligned to a solar event. In the case of Stonehenge, it's aligned to the summer solstice sunrise. And we have 4 or 5 henges in the Ohio Valley, also aligned to the summer solstice sunrise, winter solstice sunset, sunrise, summer solstice, or equinox. So almost all of the henges are aligned to solar events, as they should be.
Yeah, so the Amorites, they came from the ancient land of Amaru, the land of Canaan, and then eventually worked their way here to the west. Is that what your research has found?
Mm-hmm. They were metal traders at the beginning of the Bronze Age, so around 2700 BC. Initially, were more megalithic, but even megalithic was kind of going out at that point. So we see a transition of stone circles to the hinges with stone circles within the central platform, and then those eventually being replaced by a burial mound or a circular building in the middle of the hinges. And so it's more of a transition until they just went almost exclusively with the hinge as their solar temple.
And I know with Stonehenge, there's a lot of activity in history in regards to the Druids in that area. Would you say that the Druids were the descendant priests of the Nephilim and the Amorites?
A very similar religion, but not the same people. So one of the real misnomers when you hear the word Celtic associated with Stonehenge, it was actually the Celts who moved into the British Isles around 1500 BC and expelled the giant race. They incorporated and used a lot of their temples with a very similar religion of animism and some of the other aspects that you would have had with the earlier Amorite or Nephilim religions, but a different people.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is, when I hate to bring this back to me, but I actually got a DNA test, and on my certificate it says I'm 3 different people. I'm Phoenician, I'm Greek Hellene, and I'm Celtic. So I'm really confused as to who I am as far as a person goes. What are the physical descriptions and the differences you had found between the Nephilim, the Amorites, and then the Celtic people that had came later and expelled them?
Well, the Celtics, people came out of, Europe, Central Europe, and were pushing west. The Phoenicians, on the other hand, are Canaanites. So the Amorites and the Canaanites are actually the same people.
Okay.
One's living in the mountains, one's living closer to the shore. So they're more kind of terms of geographic locations, but we're really talking about the same people.
Gotcha. And
so
that makes
Phoenician would be /Amorite/Canaanite.
So that's why I have 3 different descriptions on my DNA certificate, right?
and the Canaanites and the Amorites were Indo-European people. So blonde hair, blue eyes, red hair, We have red-haired, blonde-haired people associated with the Hyksos, etc., with blue eyes, blonde hair. So they're well documented, even in Egyptian glyphs.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. And the mountain builders of the Ohio Valley region, what is your experience there? Because I know there's going to be a lot of people who are familiar with the Nephilim and the Amorites, but aren't familiar with your findings that you found here in the United States. Can you explain that? Your discoveries there?
What evidence of who they are?
Well, no,
asking?
The discoveries that you've found in the Ohio Valley. I know on your blog there's some recent articles about ancient America, then also about a connection to the ancient demons and fairies spoken about in folklore and mythology.
Well, we know from the skeletal remains that they were Indo-European. They are almost more Cro-Magnon than modern human, but Indo-European in the way they looked. Indian legends corroborate that and saying that they had blonde hair. They were called white Indians, which would justify the theory that, they were Amorites or people from England that were coming over here. And then, tying them into, the conical mounds with circles going around them, the hinges, the sacred geometry, the use of a numerical codex called Gematria, which we find in the Bible and other ancient writings that emanated out of Sumeria, which dictated that 666 was the sun and 1080 was the number for the moon or the earth mother. And in Ohio, the hinges are either 666 feet in circumference, and we have all the square earthworks are 1080 on each side. And so there's some, just some evidence there that cannot be denied.
Yeah,
we are talking about the same people.
Yeah, then you have also, Fritz, the name America, which you can kind of correlate to Amaruca or Amoritica. Do you find any connection possibly with the naming of America, North America, related to the Amorites and them possibly being in control of these lands?
Absolutely. That this is the land of the Amorites, and America just has its etymological root, and Amuru is, most definite. I mean, it's much easier to believe that with the amount of giants and physical evidence that's here than to believe that a guy, Amerigo Vespucci, and they named it after his first name.
No,
right,
so would you?
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense.
With these descendants of the Nephilim and the Amorites, going out throughout the years into our modern society today, with everybody speaking English and writing English pretty much all around the world, it seems like that they're possibly in control of the whole show right now in regards to the various countries, royalty, and here in America. Would you agree that we're being ran by these same people?
I'm not really sure. I'm always asked about, what are modern Nephilim or modern Amorites, and that's kind of a hard call. I mean, that gene is still around, but certainly not as prominent as it would have been 3,500 years ago.
Wouldn't their descendants, Fritz, sorry to interrupt you, wouldn't their descendants have some of the same, of course, physical characteristics and then also learning capabilities? So if I, in my ancestry, have 4,000, 5,000 years or even much further back of all this training, whether it be in science, metalworks, DNA, everything, and I'm reborn in the 21st century, wouldn't this same learning be contained within me if I'm a descendant of them? And then, of course, it'll be easier for me to be an Albert Einstein or get my PhD and do significant things as opposed to someone that is not related to these people and does not have that training. Do you see a relationship in blood and DNA to that?
Well, absolutely, because, the one aspect of these people was that they were so much smarter than anybody else. I alluded to earlier, advanced mathematics, the rule of law done by Hammurabi, that, and law codes, that emanates from them. When you look at a clock, you look at a calendar, they were on a base 12 duodecimal numbering system. So you look at a clock or a calendar, you're looking at the Amorites. So there's so many aspects of geometry and mathematics that all began with them. A lot of our language actually is emanates from that Semitic language that was started by them. Not Latin, because Latin has its roots within the Semitic and Sumerian languages that was spoken by the Amorites. So, yeah. I mean, it was just an absolute, it was very similar to the last 100 years here, where we went from horse and buggy to being on the moon and computers. That same transition happened while the Amorites were around 4,000 years ago.
And that's
absolute revolution.
In just 100 years, basically.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, Fritz, we could also say, you know, just like the myth of Atlantis, you know, that we're going towards that same destruction. We're, of course, doing great things, but we're also at the same time destroying ourselves, destroying the earth with our inventions. We're, you know, becoming a materialistic, egotistical culture where, you know, the next big thing, and it doesn't matter about the earth, our longevity or anything. It seems like we're kind of heading that way. Or are they letting us do so via free will? What's your theory there?
I'm not really sure, you know, of what that is and how that ties to the ancients. The ancients with the Amorites were basically just absorbed into other civilizations. They never really were a coherent group that, you know, that was the same all across the globe. They seemed to isolate themselves to some degree, adapted with other civilizations, like the ones in Ohio Valley were absorbed by the Sioux, the Cherokee, and the Iroquois peoples. So, but as far as prognostication and future, kind of stay away from that.
Gotcha. And what are the relationship between the white Indians and, of course, the Native American Indians who are more of a redskin? Are they related at all?
Well, somewhat. Who the archaeologists call the Hopewell were predominantly the Sioux Indians in the Ohio Valley, more specifically the Osage. We also know that the Iroquois and the Cherokee at one time were also part of one group that split about 3000 BC. Those people absorbed the Amorites. We know that there is a genetic marker called haplo-X that originates from the Sea of Galilee area where the Amorites, of course, originated. We also know that the largest Indians are the Osage, that many of the Mandan Indians, according to Catlin, had red hair, blonde hair, blue eyes, green eyes. So their genetic mark, you know, could still be seen into historic times with those Sioux populations.
What is their relation to the Roman Empire? Is there one, and possibly the Catholic religion?
Not necessarily. There were large skeletons, you know, that the Romans talked about. But, you know, by then, you know, we're already 1,500 years past really the heyday of the Amorites or the Nephilim in Europe.
Okay.
So, like remnant, like when we talk about Goliath, it says in the Bible, he was a remnant of the Rephaim. I mean, as if they were gone by then. So that's the thing is that it all ended, you know, much so early that it's very hard to tie it into, you know, Greek populations, Roman populations, and anything, excuse me, historically down the road from when they began to disappear in Europe.
Do you think this is one of the reasons for the Genome Project in regards to there's a massive worldwide project to track everybody's DNA? Do you think that the powers that be are doing this for benevolent purposes just to track it, or do they want to know the truth as well? And do you believe they know the truth already and they're just, you know, documenting it, or they still don't know and they're trying to find out the past as well?
Well, what I have found is that everything that emanates from the universities is really based more on a political agenda and has nothing to do with facts.
Okay, so a lot of the...
Yeah, so anything like that, I would be very suspect of any of their findings.
Gotcha, and that's why this is called alternative research in history, but we could also call theirs alternative research and forced history on us, correct?
Absolutely. And, the fact that the evidence that's out there that these Nephilim or Amorites were in North America is so overwhelming, but because archaeologists and universities have adopted the isolationist Beringa theory, then any information or facts is just dismissed, or if it's found in the field, it's destroyed. So, yeah, that's not a very good fair shake as far as information goes coming from our universities, because it's more based on a political agenda than actual science.
Yeah, and it seems like, of course, it's a worldwide political agenda, and this research at one time was really dangerous, but now they appear to let people such as yourself, Fritz, go ahead and do it, but you'll never, make it on 2020 or on CNN and be, or at the next TED conference. It's basically going to be podcasts like this and your own kind of research. Do you believe that they're looking and tracking what you're doing, and people such as ourselves, just to see what we come up with, and if they have to silence us, they will? Or is that era over?
Well, you really don't need to silence us, because they control the media machine. You're right. I'm not going to end up on 2020. I'm not going to end up on mainstream television, because they control that, and they know that. So anything that I've done, or even newspapers, some newspapers have done articles with me only to call an archaeologist who says that everything that I had just said in the 3 paragraphs prior to that is all garbage science.
Yeah, and then all it takes is someone an uninformed and ignorant out there to see someone with such a title saying this, and they'll immediately discount what you say. Then people that are enlightened and illuminated, that understand that there is a lot of propaganda out there, will look past that. But people like us are far and few between. So, yeah, that seems to be my experience. I've definitely had people, slander my name on the internet and do various things, when I went after various truths, and they definitely have their ways of doing that. So I agree, they might not silence us, but they'll sick their propaganda experts with their degrees on us to, say their slander on the internet, and sometimes that, of course, hurts us. So I could definitely understand with you there. The origins of numerology, how was it used to align the mounds and the earthworks perfectly towards the rising and the setting suns?
Well, the numerology, it's kind of alluded to, I think it's Genesis 11:1, when it says, now the whole world had one language. That one language was sacred geometry and numerology, not necessarily language as we know it. But we know from the numerology, it's based on basically the measurements. Gematria translates earth measures, and we can tell just by the measure, actually using the foot, the same foot that we use today, which has its ancient origins. And there's been a couple of groups like the Ohio Epigraphic Society, and they've concurred that the mounds and earthworks in the Ohio Valley were constructed using the 12-inch foot, which would make sense because we know these people were using the duodecimal base 12 number system. So that is a big key. That's probably one of the most exciting finds of mine, was to find the commonality in measurements in all of the earthworks in the Ohio Valley that were following that 660 or 666 and 1080 numerical sequence.
Gotcha. And there's some type of connection to the jinn and the demons of the old world. Can you explain that?
Not necessarily demons. I don't know that I'm on board with that. Is that the Nephilim were necessarily a demonic race? There's many people that do believe that, however, that the Nephilim is the source of the next Antichrist. But when you look at, well, for you, instance, your genealogy that you're talking about is probably going to go back to this Nephilim race. That's
what it appears. And when I talk
to many Europeans.
Yeah, and when I talk about demons, and I know, again, a lot of us have done research in different areas. I've looked into a lot of that because, of course, I've looked into my DNA and science, and then I studied history in regards to these various entities, and I've probably done a little bit more in that area of demon research and angels and so forth. my understanding is the Greek daemon, that's where we get the word demon from, and they were actually considered angels back then. And then later on, when the Catholic Church had taken over and our languages were changed somewhat, they made it a derogatory term, and then they made their daemons angels. And so the demon became an angel, but not the demons of old. And it's based on magic and spirits and so forth. And the jinn would be similar to the genie, the genie in the bottle kind of thing. And the jinn, I think, was it used in more of the Asian or Indonesian cultures, or?
Yeah, that sounds correct.
Okay, yeah, and I found a lot of connections there as well. And then also the men of old and renown, there's connections there with Greece as well, with Boeotia and various people there. The capital of Boeotia was founded in 1500 BC by the Phoenician prince Cadmus, who was the son of Agor, king of Phoenicia. And there seems to be a real connection there that I've found also with the demons. So let me see here.
Yeah, that sounds like you find the root word Og, and that's one of the etymological threads that you can find with these people.
In studying the Amorites as well, because you had mentioned them, there's a connection there with their name to and then Ma, which would be goddess worship. Can you tell us a little bit about the goddess worship and the connection there with the Nephilim?
Yeah, that's an important aspect in the religion, that if you understand that, you'll understand Stonehenge, you'll understand all the earthworks in the Ohio Valley. And that is the idea of balance. And that is, you didn't want too much sun because the crops would burn. You didn't want too much earth mother because the crops would flood. And so they always were trying to achieve a perfect balance. And they express that geometrically in the Ohio Valley as, say, a circular earthwork attached to a square earthwork. The circle and square will have to have equal areas. To have done that, you would have to known how to square a circle, which is advanced mathematics. But it was always visually to express that idea of equal balance. Now, we go to England, the account of giants there were the Magog. So there we have God, which is the male, and, of course, Ma be the mother. So mother and son are expressed in that. In the Bible, they talk about the Magog. So in a lot of the names, even you'll find both a male and a female principle that are related. Even so much as the Native Americans called these people the Oligui, that could best be transferred or broken down into Al, which would be, high place. Al, Og, of course, we have Og. And then Iwi would be Awa or Ava or Eve. So El Agua, the high place of Og and Magog or Eve.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that would go along the lines of balancing our male and our female as one. And then you see later on, in the occult, such as the Knights Templar and in Gnosticism, you have Aletheus Levi with Baphomet. And the Baphomet character is a connection kind of between an animal kind of type man and then also a woman with female breast. And then he has two fingers towards the sky, which is the as above, and then two fingers pointed towards the so below. So the Ma is always considered Earth, Mother Earth. And then the would be the as above, the gods, the male part.
Yeah, is actually Hindi for sun. You look at a name like Solomon. Sol is Latin for sun. Is Hindi for sun. An is Egyptian for sun. So he meant sun, sun, sun. But back to the Masonic, we have earthworks in the Ohio Valley that are 555 feet in circumference. Very important because 555 times pi, if you stretch it out far enough, gives you 1746, which is a sum total of 666 plus 1080. So that number, 555, represents the holy marriage, the marriage of opposites of the sun and the earth mother. And in modern day, the Washington Monument is 555 feet because that is who George Washington best represented it, because he had that balance of power.
Well,
and so he was represented by 555.5, which times 12 is 6,666 somehow, but you can get your 666 out of that too. But the 555 definitely represents the marriage of opposites, the holy union.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Those numbers also appear in Stonehenge. In Stonehenge, you have the trilithon, that half-circle horseshoe shape. In the summer solstice, the heel stone on the outside sends the shadow into that, thus impregnating the Earth Mother, which is what that represents. So you have both your solar and your Earth Mother icons there also. But generally, you're always going to find that. And it's really being able to discern those icons when you go to these ancient sites to really be enlightened to what you're looking at and to know the ancient religion and how it was being expressed within the earthworks themselves.
And that common connection, of course, that you found is mathematics and gematria. And in regards to George Washington, there's a figure of him in the Capitol, and he's depicted as a god almost in a Baphomet-type stance, or sitting down, as I had mentioned earlier, where he has his shirt off and he's pointing to the as above, and the so below, he has the actual sword in his hand pointing to the below. That's interesting that you say that, and I agree that there's symbols, indications, paintings that, we could find here in America that relate to your studies as well.
Yeah, the Masons are all about Jerusalem and Mount Moriah, but Mount Moriah is actually the Mount of the Amorites, is where the name is derived from. And, Jerusalem is an ancient sun city by the Amorites, and so they're somewhat tied into the Amorites from that aspect also.
Yeah, and of course you have that in the Bible, and then the Knights Templar, you have that as well. You have the Masters of Jerusalem that various families and kingdoms have taken over time, and I know right now Russia has that title, and they're called the Third Rome. And it's interesting, you have the double-headed eagle, which is their symbol and their coat of arms, and then in Freemasonry you find the Scottish Rite, who's just across the street, practically on the 13th block there in Washington, D.C., with that same symbol. What is the double-headed eagle? Have you seen this symbol? Is it a symbol of the Amorites?
There's an eagle. I don't know that it's double-headed. I don't know that I've actually looked into that symbol before. It's a possibility, so I won't discount it, but that is a connection I haven't made, so possibly.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for your honesty, and I know it's impossible, even when you research for so many years, over a decade, to catch everything, and a lot of us out there might know more about the double-headed eagle, or maybe you're a 33rd degree Freemason listening, and I know you guys are under oath as far as what you can and can't say, so a lot of that is hidden from us, and it still is to this day. But again, it's also right in front of our face with the Scottish Rite, the double-headed eagle. You have the Masters of Jerusalem up in Russia with a double-headed eagle. So there's definitely a connection there. And then Freemasons all around the world seem to be building that temple. And it looks like it's a worldwide temple that they are building. But again, that'll be another podcast in itself. What do you think the future is for the Nephilim and the Amorites, as far as, are they going to come back? There's mentions in the Bible about, as it was in the days of Noah, it will be so in the days of man. Do you find any connection there, that they're maybe trying to re-engineer this giant or Amorite race, or is that just a bad theory of mine?
Yeah, that is, like I alluded to earlier, it's like something that comes up, but it's like I don't have any definitive evidence to say that, there's a pod of Amorites here or there, or this bloodline or that bloodline. I've kind of got word that a lot of the royalty in Europe actually traces their heredity back to the Amorites and to that bloodline. So, how does that correlate with, any kind of theories on, their reemergence? Whether that's the reemergence of kingships in Europe, I'm not sure, but I don't know. I've had my face so far into the past. It's really hard to sometimes look at it in a modern perspective and say, that these ancients are here or there, or on the doorstep of any upcoming historical event.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty, Fritz, and we need people like you to stay in those trenches in the past to get that for us, because a lot of the stuff in regards to now the rulers that are the Illuminati, the powers that be, who David Icke might call reptilians, is just getting into conspiracy and really theorizing. And maybe in the next 100 or 200 years will be the best time to research it, because we'll know the answers, because a lot of it's based on propaganda, and there's a lot of that out there. What is your feelings in regard to David Icke, if you've heard him talk about the royalty being reptilians, and is there any connection with this reptilian theory to the Nephilim and the Amorites?
None that I've ever come across.
Okay.
And
but you've seen David Icke.
I leave that door open, and I don't disparage their views on that. But what was exciting with my research is I could always find a scientific precedent for what I found and what my theories were, whether those be skeletal types in the numerology or the sacred geometry or etymology and language and finding Hebrew words within Native American languages, that I could always find tangible evidence opposed to the theories based on theories with really nothing. Show me something. Show me something about Atlantis. Show me something about Mu. Some of that I get tied in with, and I really have no evidence for anybody on any of that, because I don't know that you can prove it.
Yeah,
so I think this is the way to say the Amorites existed. This is the evidence we have that they did exist, and they did exist in North America, and to go from there, opposed to, theories based on theories.
Yeah, in your 13 years of research, you have not come across any type of reptilian connection with the Nephilim, sons of God, or the royalty?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
That, and then the misnomer, too, about the 6 fingers. And so I've come across, I researched 13 years, over 10,000 various histories to find the giants that I did, but not one case that I find one with 6 fingers.
What about the double rows of teeth?
Very much so. A lot of them. An awful lot of them. And I know from the Babylonian Talmud that it said that some of those giants over in the biblical lands had double rows of teeth. We know that the Fomorians is Muru, it's what that base, that etymological root from the Fomorians. We know they had double rows of teeth. So we can track the double rows of teeth across, and then, of course, having that historical provenance of historical accounts of them finding these skeletons or skulls that were large and then had the double rows of teeth. So that, yes, that is some very good tangible evidence, and evidence that we can link back into those 3 main theaters where my book goes, and that's basically the U.S. and then England, the British Isles, and then the biblical Levant.
This concludes the Gnostic Warrior Radio Show and podcast. We had some difficulties with our audio, and then also the cell phone dropping over the course of the past couple days in recording this interview. So we decided to wrap it up, and we'll revisit this another time in the future with Fritz in 2014. I really appreciate the time he had taken to share with the audience, the Gnostic Warriors out there listening all around the world. And if you'd like to find out more information about Fritz Zimmerman and his work, the best place to go would be Amazon.com, and go ahead and you can Google his book, The Nephilim Chronicles, and you'll find both his books there. If you're interested, I highly recommend you get those books, because I'm going to do the same. And again, Fritz, if you're listening, thanks for your time, brother. Peace.